Today is May 16th, 2018. My name is Burt Grad. I am with the Software Industry Special Interest Group. I'm conducting an oral history interview of Herb Schorr. This is part of the ongoing oral history program of the Software Industry Special Interest Group, which is part of the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California. We are here at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California. This interview is being videotaped and recorded and will be transcribed, edited, and posted on the Computer History Museum website. Herb, let's get started. We usually start these with when you were born. So where and when were you born?
I was born in the Bronx of New York City, the borough thereof, on January 20th, 1936.
Did you grow up there in the Bronx, or did you move?
No, I grew up in the Bronx. I went to the Bronx High School of Science.
That's a magnificent place to be. Did you have a particular area of specialty or something you were focused on when you were there at in your high school?
Not really. I was actually an excellent economist or economic student. And I might well have gone into that, except the professor of economics wasn't able to get a job during the Depression. So he advised me to stay away from the economics profession.
Is this at college or was this high school?
High school.
Really? So had people of that caliber teaching there at the Bronx High School of Science, huh?
Oh yes, they had people, the head of the math department had been a professor, head of the math department in Budapest, one of the major universities. He was a Second World War refugee, and also there's a lot of people because of the war and because of the Depression, so science was able to recruit the best out of the public school system.
That was one of, I think, 3 or 4 of these special high schools in New York, and the quality of everything I've heard about the quality of the education there was pretty good. Did you feel that when you were taking it, going there?
Pretty much. I mean, it still is very good, by the way.
I'm sure it is still. But did you have any special hobbies or things that you did while you were either in high school or things that really took your time and interest?
Hobbies were stamp collecting and electronics.
What were you doing in electronics that early?
Making radios. It was radio technology. I used to go down to Canal Street, which was all sorts of electronics stores. You can buy all sorts of parts there. I took the subway for 5 cents. That's all it cost for a ride. And things, we didn't even think about safety.
Were you building your own radio sets?
Yes.
Were they for just local stuff, or were you trying to do pick up distant stations? What were you doing?
No, just local stuff. Just learning about it, building my own.
Was there a particular, other than your economics professor who said don't go into economics, were there other professors, teachers at that time that you were particularly impressed with, or subjects that turned you on?
Well, I was an excellent math student. I was an excellent math, science, economics students, and a lousy English major and language major. So I had a very spotted high school record of A's and C's.
I see. Nice mixture of those things. Any other special experiences? What did your mother do?
My mother eventually was a homemaker, and then she went to work in a candy store to selling as a sales clerk, because we needed the income. My father was in the garment industry, hats, and that was a very spotty job. He would work for a bunch of months, and then they would lay him off, and so on.
Was he one of those people got affected by the chemicals that were used in making the hats, or was it not an issue then?
I don't think so. He lived to almost 90.
Because the Mad Hatter, I'm told, in the
No, I think that was gone by then.
Okay, great. Anything else from high school, any particular clubs or other outside activities, sports, any of those kinds of things?
Oh, we did sports, yes, I did sports. But
What did you like particularly?
we did what was seasonal. So in the fall we played basketball. In the winter we stayed indoors. The spring we played baseball, or we played football in the fall. And it was mostly just kids from the neighborhood. We just self-organized.
It wasn't a serious kind of thing where you were
No.
on the high school teams or anything like that.
I wasn't good enough.
Neither was I. So you then go to college. What year? Do you remember what year you started college? How old were you when you started college?
1953, I started college.
You were 17 years old.
Yeah.
And where did you go?
City College of New York.
Okay. And what did you major in?
Electrical engineering.
Why?
Why? Because I was good in mathematics. I also was interested in earning a living. This was the beginning of the Sputnik era, and there were plentiful jobs in the electronics industry.
So it was the electronics connection to your radio thing that may have led you that direction.
Yes.
You were there 4 years?
Yes.
And anything special, particular, that you remember enjoying, not enjoying?
No, it was a good experience.
You were probably a pretty good student.
Yes. You're talking about college or high school?
College now.
Well, college, I was the first in the electrical engineering class. Len Kleinrock was number 2.
So that's quite an experience. Anything special outside of the classes that you did in CCNY?
No.
Any
no.
clubs, any other organizations, any outside activities?
Nothing really important. This was a tough game. I used to have sometimes physics course starting at 8 o'clock in the morning at City College, and I had a good 45-minute commute on the subway and walking to get there. So.
Now, was CCNY tuition free at that point?
Yes.
Did you work summers?
Yes, but I also had a New York State scholarship.
That helped considerably.
Yes.
So even though you were at CCNY and no tuition, you did get the scholarship money in addition.
Yes.
How did you get the scholarship? Was it something you had to qualify for or take tests for?
Yeah,
and so you just it was local tests there that New York State provided. You graduated then in '57?
Yes.
Had you decided at that point what you wanted to do?
Well, I had decided I would do graduate studies in engineering.
Why? Did you want to teach? There must have been some motivation to take graduate work.
Motivation. I guess I like being a student or something. I don't know.
Well, I'm thinking about from a money standpoint. You had a free ride in that sense at CCNY.
I had a free ride at Princeton.
Oh, how come?
They gave me a fellowship the first year, and they kept giving me other money. Some of it was for assistantships and teaching, but
well, I guess what I'm thinking about.
It was all free.
Did you intend to teach? Was that why you were going that direction, or did you? I mean, most electrical engineers went out and became engineers.
No, I didn't. I guess I didn't intend to teach, but I wound up seeing what these guys' lives were like, the professors, and decided it was not so bad. So I did try my hand at teaching. After I graduated, I first went to Cambridge University in England on an Nsf Postdoctoral Fellowship.
I want to explore a little. I can't get a picture of you as a student. Were you strictly working on your first one in college, just taking your courses? You don't mention any summer work. You don't mention these kind of things, which many people do.
Some of the summer work was lifting soda bottles and delivering soda from trucks. I worked in a drugstore at a magnificent rate of 40 cents an hour. And that continued in the school year. I cut back the hours. Did I do anything technically? I don't think I had a technical job until my senior year.
What was that job?
I went to work for IT&T Research Labs in Nutley, New Jersey.
And this is your senior year at CCNY.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Between that and after I had graduated, and they gave me a job, and it was interesting. By the end of I must have had a management gene somewhere. By the end of the summer, I had 10 people working for me at IT&T, including several full-time employees.
So you were 21 or 22 at that point
Yes.
in time. Ah, interesting. You know, we do pick up, so none of the jobs you had were really things other than just things that kids get to do. Nothing special because your electronics or your radio skills
Nope.
or any of that kind of
It
thing.
was a different environment. You were lucky to make a buck, much less get something good. I didn't get something really interesting, as I said, till the senior year.
Did that work with IT&T, did that motivate you in any particular direction?
Ah, yes. So IT&T had me building a digital pulse generator, and because you couldn't buy it off the shelf. So I did that and supervised it. So when I got to Princeton, they decided that I should take a course on digital circuits and technology, and switching theory it was called. And the guy there was a fellow by the name of Professor McCluskey, E.J. McCluskey, who left actually before I finished my thesis and went to Stanford. So they shoehorned me into that. The guy who was who advised the students said, "Well, I see you have these digital circuits in your background at IT&T. You ought to take this course." And I said, "Well, I'm really interested in control theory." And he said, "You ought to take this course." I got the message that he's filling up this class, and I was going to take that course. It was a small department at Princeton then, and you know, it's not big now, but it was even very small. So who was I to buck a full professor? But I wound up taking the course with McCluskey, and he eventually became my advisor. I liked what was going on, and I wound up, he was giving a lecture, and he was lecturing on some material, and I found a hole in what he was doing. So we figured out how to fix that hole, and we wrote a paper.
Was that your first published paper?
Yes.
Why did you pick Princeton, or did they pick you?
Strange coincidence. I had admissions to a few schools: Carnegie Institute of Technology, MIT, and Princeton. I remember. Maybe there's probably more since I wasn't sure. Well, Princeton gave me a fellowship. That was nice. MIT gave me an assistantship, but I had my boyhood friend's sister went to Wellesley, and she said, "You don't want any part of MIT and all those nerds." So I said, "Okay, Princeton sounds like a good place," and so I went there.
You never took a master's degree. You went directly into a PhD program?
That's right, but I have 2 master's degrees from Princeton.
So that was in the process of you getting your PhD, you got some master's degrees?
Well, one master's was after you passed the general exam. You got a Master's of Arts. One summer I worked for RCA, Sarnoff Laboratories, and I wound up doing some work which we published a paper on, and Princeton was giving these students who came from Sarnoff an MSEE So McCluskey, who I guess was always a troublemaker, said, you should apply for getting an MSEE. You've written a paper just like these guys have. It got published. So again, I didn't want to argue with him, particularly he controlled my life. So I applied and they gave me the MSEE.
To follow that a bit more, McCluskey became your advisor. When did you decide what your thesis was going to be on? Early on, or was that, you were at Princeton for a few years?
Yes.
What, 4 years altogether, maybe?
Yeah, 4 or 5 years.
So you graduated probably around 61, 62?
No, 62, but Princeton only gave degrees at the end of the year, so I missed the 62 graduation.
So you actually picked it up in 63?
So when did I decide?
I guess I'm trying to get us two things. Did you start to specialize in an area of particular interest besides your switching theory stuff? And when did you decide, with McCluskey's help, what your thesis would be on?
First, I had to make an enemy.
Who was that?
So one professor there said, come join my group and do some research, and no strings attached. However, he gave me a problem, which I found the solution of it in a textbook. So I said, what kind of research is this? And I decided I didn't like the area information. It was signal processing information theory, and so I went to McCluskey and got a thesis topic from him.
And what was your thesis topic?
Well, we were trying to automate the synthesis of digital computers. And my particular job was I defined a register transfer language in which to describe the computer, which was the first one. A lot of the design automation programs picked up from that. And then I had to produce, from the register transfers, produce Boolean logic description. And then somebody else was going to take that and develop do the actual synthesis of the machine. Well, I succeeded, but the guy in the project who was supposed to do the second part didn't. We were financed by AT&T Bell Labs.
Oh, so this was a finance project?
Yes, but McCluskey had come from Bell Labs, so he had connections there. So we did that, and I had to write a compiler. So I found there's a guy by the name of Ned Irons who was at Princeton, and he had invented a syntax-directed compiler. So you gave, in his case, he was dealing with trying to compile ALGOL programs. So you gave the syntax of ALGOL into his compiler, and out came ALGOL code, a code which implemented ALGOL. So I replaced his syntax rules with a registered transfer language description, and wrote what you had to write. The description, the front part was a description of what you were looking for, and the back part was the translation. So I did that, and out came Boolean was the second part. It was very much like expert systems.
You mentioned that earlier when we were talking before. In what way was it like an expert system?
We had a mechanism which was like the inference engine, and you wrote rules, and that's how you described the problem with rules.
What do you mean by a rule?
What do I mean by a rule? If you had A and B, you could say A and B, and that added up to C. That could be a rule.
So was it an if-then, or was it a mathematical statement, or was it a combination?
Register transfer description of a circuit.
So it was not a conditional transfer. Then what makes it a decision rule if it's simply a statement of some specific action to be
It
taken?
wasn't. It was essentially a rule-based compiler. That's all.
What do you mean then by a rule-based compiler? Because this will come up later in our discussions.
Well, you had a bunch of rules, which, if you fed a description of what you were trying to describe into the computer, then the computer had a bunch of rules on how to translate that into Boolean logic.
So how were those rules expressed? Did you write them in English?
No, in a register transfer language.
What does that mean?
What does that mean?
Can you give me an example of some statement in a register transfer language that I could recognize?
Oh, you could say shift the register right by 2 places.
But it wasn't under a certain condition you would shift it right?
Yes, you can say if this and that, then.
That's what I was getting at, that a rule seemed to me to have some condition. Under this circumstance, you take this particular defined action.
Yes.
And how did you, was that a mathematical formulation? How did the rules look?
No, I defined a register transfer language, and then I wrote the rules.
But you weren't the language. What was the language in English? Was the language in symbolic form? What was the
It
language?
was symbolic form. Computer, something that could be input to a computer. Since I looked at APL and you could describe a computer in APL, I went to Harvard to talk to Ken Iverson about that, but it was not, his symbols were not in an 086 key punch. You couldn't.
He had created his own set of symbols for sure. With
Right, I said that's.
APL's an ape programming language is what Ken Iverson.
Yes. So I said, this is no good, maybe okay to do the job, but I can't get it into a computer. Had to be computable was part of the thing.
Right. So you spent, when did you leave Princeton? I know you got your degree in 63 officially, but you were done in 62, is that correct?
I went to Princeton, to Cambridge.
Why did you go to Cambridge?
Well, I got married. I told my wife we'd spend a year in Europe. And I thought, I'm going to have the rest of my life to work anyway. And Cambridge had some wonderful people there at the time. Morris Wilks was in charge, but there was two barons, one who went to a company, another one who ran computers at another university. And who the hell?
So you were married in 62?
Yes.
And name of your wife?
Lenore.
Had she also come from the Bronx, or was this from a different experience?
Yes, 5 blocks, not 5 blocks, but a few miles away.
Is this someone you had known during high school?
No.
In college?
No, we were in an arranged marriage, if you really want to know.
Really? Go ahead, please. It's different.
We had, her parents and my parents had a mutual friend. The mutual friend was saving Lenore, my wife, for her son, but her son went off to Michigan and married some woman, and so she was now footloose and fancy-free. She was so the mutual friend introduced us.
So arranged is not in the old sense of having a matchmaker.
Well, we did. The friend was the matchmaker.
I see. Okay. Now, Cambridge, did you have people you knew there? So that was why you wanted to go there? Was it on some kind of a scholarship or something? Tell me what was going on.
Well, I got an Nsf Postdoctoral Fellowship. And Wilks was the guy who did microprogramming. And this was very much akin to what I had done in the register transfer language. So I thought this would be a good place to go, or at least it was a good thing to bullshit the NSF people who were awarding these things. So I could make a plausible story as to why my work related to what Cambridge was doing.
So you could make a reasonable living live reasonably on these scholarships and grants and things like that?
Yes, you could live. Yes, as you make more money, your needs go up. But
as you get married, your needs go up a little bit too.
That's true. But Lenore was never a money-hungry woman in that sense. For life standards, she liked money, but not necessarily.
So how long did you stay there in Cambridge? Just a year, or did you go longer?
Yeah, just a year.
So you went over in '62 after you were married?
Yes.
And then you stayed there for a year. You came back to the States in '63?
Yes.
And I guess it was an important thing. Why did you decide not to teach? It's certainly the background you had there.
I went to teach.
Pardon me?
I went to teach.
Oh, did you? So where did you go to teach?
Columbia.
Okay. And so you started in '63. What were you teaching?
Electrical engineering.
Any particular subjects within EE?
Well, the only one that sticks in my head was that the guy who taught information theory, strict information theory, decided late in the year, maybe even in the summer, to go to Illinois, the university. So they had a course in information theory that needed to be taught. And they said, you are the candidate for doing that. So they made me another offer I couldn't refuse. They gave me his notes. He was on the way to publishing a book and said, here. So I wound up teaching that. I don't remember anything else about that. Was the salient thing.
So let me come back to this. You've graduated. Did you look at a variety of schools? Did a variety of schools come to you? How did that happen?
I interviewed at a few schools.
Did you stay in the New York area on purpose?
Well, I wanted to be on the East Coast. Though later, eventually, we should get ahead of the story, I nearly went to Berkeley. After finding out that Columbia was essentially not in good shape. They had two factions in the faculty factions, and they tried to, and candidates for tenure, if they were in Block A, Block B would vote against them, and vice versa. So some very good guys who went on to get tenure elsewhere were denied tenure at Columbia, and I said, this is not a winning place.
How long did you stay at Columbia?
1 year.
So by 1964, you decide you want to continue to teach, or you decide you want to work for a company? What was your decision then?
Well, nothing so straightforward as that. So I decided, so in January of the year, I figured there's no point staying at Columbia. So I applied for jobs at Berkeley and a few other places. And it was too late in the academic year for them to give me a position. So Latvizadeh, who was a well-known professor.
Spell the last name.
Zadeh.
Thank you.
Interviewed me, and he said, okay, if I get one rejection, you'll get a job offer.
From
Berkeley.
Okay.
But he didn't. So they agreed to send me to, he would get me a position at T.J. Watson Research Center with one of his students, Jack Bertram, had gotten Zadeh was his thesis advisor. And he also got me another thing, was at that point in time, if you quit IBM, you could never get re-employed by IBM. And there were very few opportunities with a PhD in computers, an electrical PhD. There were very few respectable places that you could work outside of academia. It was GE Labs, Bell Labs, maybe RCA and Hughes, but I didn't really want to do defense work. Oh, I had worked during college at Rand Corporation. I forgot to tell you that.
We'll come back to that in a minute, but so go ahead. So this is basically, he's offering that he can arrange a job for you, or at least a temporary job for you, at T.J. Watson Research, which is in was Yorktown Heights then already?
Yes. I was living in Riverdale.
Not a bad commute.
So I wound, yeah.
So this is so when you finish your term at Columbia in the middle of 1964, if I have it right, you start in the T.J. Watson Research Center. Interesting. And who were you working for? Who was your?
Bertram and John Cock. John Cock was my my manager.
He was already there.
Yes.
And Bertram was the head of the lab at that point in time.
Yes,
the research
was
lab?
head of the computer science research activities.
Within the lab.
Within the lab.
Who was running the lab then? This is pre-Gomery, I think, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Oh.
I don't remember, because I had been up there also.
I know his name, but I don't remember.
I
know him.
It's not important.
So you can look it up anyway.
So it doesn't. You start. That's your first job there. How long did you stay at the Watson lab?
Well, it depends how you figure. We spent a year. We designed something which a computer IBM had got was worried. Sperry had come in with with their machine, I think, the 1003, something like that, and they were getting all the scientific computing. People weren't going to 360 at the scientific.
Well, the 360 had been announced, but it wasn't delivered until 66. It was announced in 64, I think. But you still had we had operating systems problems, my memory serves me correctly.
Yes.
In the 60s. Anyway, go ahead.
No, but they had trouble in maybe 64. The machine was not being bought by all their scientific customers.
That's true.
So Watson had set up this project at Yorktown where we were designing a supercomputer which would work with for the scientific area customers. And
what was the name? Do you remember the code name?
Sure, Project Y.
This is Project Y, okay. Who else were you working with?
Ed Sussenguth, Fran Allen. Who else? Brian Randall, who went back to England eventually.
What was your role in that team?
I was doing the architecture of the machine. We've skipped one thing at Cambridge. There's two important things we should talk about at Cambridge.
Go ahead.
One, I got put on joined a team which was designing a computer based on tunnel diode technology. Unfortunately, they never got the Elliott brothers were supposed to provide the tunnel diodes. They never were able to get them to work, but it whetted my appetite for doing machine design and architecture, which is what I wound up doing when I joined Bertram. So I did the architecture of his machine.
So you were definitely doing hardware architecture. Even though some of your work would have been software oriented, but this was really hardware design.
But I did software also. So Wilkes had a version of Lisp, which he ran on his computers, which his computers were not as powerful as American ones. So he devised a language which he called WISP, and
that was a subset of Lisp.
Yes. And CERN at one came and said they wanted that program, I think on their 79090. So he had to get the garbage collector for that machine. And he plucked me out and said, why don't you write the garbage collector? I said, well, I worked on a CDC machine at Princeton, and this is an IBM machine. And he said, oh, all these American machines are the same. So I went and did that, and as I told you the other day, we invented an algorithm. I had a I went back when I went to Columbia. I had a student by the name of Bill Waite, and he was great.
What was the name?
Waite, W-A-I-T-E, who eventually left for Australia. I don't know why. I don't remember why, but he and I finished the programming of this job, and he was a better programmer than I was and could get into the guts of the operating system more than I knew. So he and I finished that up, wrote a paper, and that Knuth eventually said this was the fast.
Donald Knuth, K-N-U-T-H, yes, for Stanford.
Said this was in his book, said this was the fastest known garbage collector. I don't think you can do better than that. And then it turned out Peter Deutsch at Berkeley had simultaneously and independently invented it, but it was also became very popular because it was well, you looked at data in two ways, so proving the correctness of it became a sport for the theorem proving crowd. So I did do software at Cambridge. I had done really software at Columbia, at Princeton in my thesis.
But it sounds like you're an architect, a systems designer type thing, rather than so much an implementer or a coder.
Correct.
Is that a correct statement?
That's right.
Okay, let's keep going. So you're at Yorktown. At this point, you think of this as a permanent job, or you think of this sort of interim before you go back to teaching?
No, permanent job.
Why?
I like designing machines, and I figured out I couldn't do that at a university.
Had you enjoyed you had only taught really a couple of classes, I guess, at Columbia. Did you enjoy that?
No.
But you like training people and teaching people. I see that later on.
Yes, but it's not, as I like wagishly to say, I taught at Columbia and Berkeley, and there was riots in both places. So.
Is that really true, or is that just fun to say?
Yes, it's true.
Give me an example.
Well, there was the Vietnam riots.
The riots, not in your classroom.
No, the engineers were dead up to these things. I went up to the Berkeley campus and to teach, and you'd go through a whole mishmash of crowds. You get to the engineering building, you wouldn't know anything was happening.
I'm going to move ahead a bit. You were certainly in a very interesting part of IBM and at a very interesting time. The 1960s were a period of great excitement and great development going on. Did your system, your Project Y, did it actually result in a computer that was implemented, built, sold?
Yes, but a much more circuitous route. We went, Watson plucked the project out of Yorktown, and we went to Menlo Park.
That's the opposite, in California, not the one in New Jersey.
No, not with Edison.
And why was that changed? Why was that moved? Do you know?
Well, they wanted, one, they didn't want us to get under the influence of Poughkeepsie. And two, we were going to work with the Lawrence Radiation Lab, the Lawrence Berkeley Labs, and also Los Alamos. So they figured this was a good, and they had IBM, contrary to this be calling Silicon Valley, IBM produced a lot of magnetic bits in this area. So
that became the tape drive place and so forth at some point in time.
And discs.
The disk drive.
Discs were invented here.
Yeah.
So
all of a sudden now, this is what, 1965? 60s,
something like that.
You're being asked or told to move to the West Coast?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have any problems with that change?
No, not really.
Did your wife have any problems with it?
No.
Because you had family and things here on the East Coast.
Yes.
But that wasn't a restraint as far as you were concerned. Okay? So what, 1965, 66, you're moving out to California, to the same area we're in now.
Exactly. We started in Sunnyvale in a warehouse, and then built a laboratory on Sand Hill Road, which is now the home of several VCs, or one VC.
300 of them, I think, the last I looked.
So, well, our own particular building got taken over by
them.
by
So what department, what division were you in at that point in time? Were you still in research?
Oh no. We were part of a product division,
SDD?
SDD.
But you were then on the engineering development side.
Well, I was in charge of architecture for the machine, and then the programming guy sort of went off the deep end, and I took over architecture and programming
Wow,
for this machine.
pretty significant responsibility for a new product.
Yes.
And what happened with Project
What happened was that
Project Y?
that we were 360 was doing very well, thank you, and so they decided they didn't need a non-compatible machine. And Gene Amdahl argued, who was part of who was stationed out here, became part of the project. He argued he could do as well with a 360 architecture as our architecture. Our architecture essentially became RISC.
Ah, so is that the connection with John Koch?
Yes.
Aha. So at that point, when did the Project Y as such terminate? A year? Well, how long did you work? A year, 2 years?
Oh,
on
at
it?
least
That's all.
2 years, 2-3 years.
So probably about 67, 68, somewhere along there.
Yes, you want me to?
No, we're close enough to all practical purposes. So you had been at SDD. This project is now terminated.
It didn't terminate. They changed direction to make it 360 compatible. And a bunch of us left.
When you say left, what does that mean?
Oh, we moved to different parts of IBM.
So where did you go?
I was given the job of being the director of the computer science department at Yorktown.
I'm trying to match it up here. So now you become director of computer science. Okay, I have that connection. Fair enough. And that starts, what, probably around 67, 68, do you remember?
About that.
Okay. If you want to look, go ahead.
Doesn't matter.
Close enough. Okay. Now you note that as being part of the advanced computer system when you went there. Was that ACS already to be started then or worked on then, or is that later?
No, that was what we went to Menlo Park with.
Oh, so ACS, that was what was called?
Project Y became ACS.
Okay, now I got it.
Sorry.
And then, because you saw yourself as Director of Computer Science Department, Programming and Architecture for ACS. So and now the next thing you're showing on your thing is Advanced Systems Division, Product and Service Planning.
No,
that's wrong.
Wrong. I ran the Computer Science Division at Yorktown.
So now you come back to the East Coast.
Yes.
Okay. I hear you. Vice President of Research Division for Computer Science, would that be the right title?
No.
Okay. So you just come back into the Computer Science
I
Department.
was director of the computer science.
Okay. So now we have Director of Computer Science. So you're back at IBM Research Lab.
Yes.
Okay. And who is running the lab then? Do you remember? This is 68,
Yeah.
69.
Anderson.
Who?
Anderson was his last name. Arthur, I think. No, it's Arthur.
So you're now the director of the computer science. Who were you working directly for? Were you working for the lab director or somebody in between?
Yes,
Anderson
was the lab director.
And you were reporting to him. Any problem as far as moving back to the East Coast? You seem to have gone back and forth quite a bit between East Coast and West Coast in your life.
We moved to Cambridge, Princeton, Cambridge.
That wasn't an issue for you particularly?
No.
Some people have strong preferences. That was not a driving force for you. Okay, now you're back in Yorktown Heights and running the computer science lab. Who do you have working for you?
Well, I had the APL group working for me.
So Ken Iverson, okay.
Ken Iverson.
Now, was Koch working for you at that time or not?
No.
Did he ever work for anybody?
Well,
John was very independent, what I'm told.
Yeah, and I had worked for John.
I see.
And then Bertram, when we went to the West Coast, took me out from under John and I became the manager, and John, I guess, was the sort of an advisor to Bertram or something like that. And I don't think John and Bertram did that because he didn't think John was a great manager.
He probably was accurate.
But John resented it, nevertheless. So it took John eventually came back to Yorktown, but he first went to the math department. And then after a few years, he came back into computer science.
Well, his contribution, the development of the RISC thing, too bad IBM didn't take advantage of it early enough, but
Yep.
one of those things. So how long do you stay as the head of the computer science lab? Is that a couple of years?
Yeah, a couple of years.
What were your major projects, things you were working on?
We did something which was System A. That's all I know is systems, basically.
And what was System A supposed to do?
We defined an architecture which had 3 levels: a supervisory level, then an intermediate level, and then the high level. And we were working on this, and then IBM, as a research project, IBM ran into the first time where revenues went down in a recession.
So we're down to about 1970 at this point in time, because that's when it happened.
So they needed something, and I don't know, I think Bertram was in Armonk or something like that.
He was by then, yes.
And they took me, they said they either were going to produce another 370, or the only other systems project around was my System A. So
Was that to be a general purpose computer?
Yes.
Was it compatible with the 360
No.
architecture? Ooh. Okay.
No, that was the thing. Well, what happened was that we showed them that, they liked it, they gave it to Bob Evans to implement. Bob Evans said, forget the bottom 2 layers about which we knew how to do. He settled on the top layer, and he was going to do everything below that in microcode, which we thought would be as slow as blazes and not very good.
Now he was that was the system, this was DSD, right, at that point in time? That was Poughkeepsie headquartered, if I remember correctly.
Yes, he ran the machine guys, and he decided to do that. So I went, at this point, Bertram started up a new division called which was ASDD, the old division, but they turned it completely around. They were not doing applications particularly. The assignment we had was to come up with a set of market requirements for this system, which was now called FS.
So this is what they call future systems.
Yes.
Okay. Now, did you have a new title now? I see here a title change. Vice President, Product and Service Planning for Advanced Systems. So now that is accurate, that is correct. Where were they headquartered?
Mohansic.
That was still Mohansic, where ASD had been forever.
Yes. Well, we closed it down, I think. We got rid of it.
Now, ASD had the responsibility, my memory serves me correctly, also was the location, to do the time-sharing system, TSS.
Correct.
And by this point, that was either done or not going to ever get done.
It was not, they had more or less cut it off at 7 or 9.
I think they delivered less than 10 versions.
Yeah, something like that. They eventually got that to work real well, but by that time...
I was involved in that. VMCMS was the thing we used to actually sell to the thing. I mentioned to you the other day, there was a side story that IBM had lost the first 2 time-sharing contracts and brought in Watts Humphrey and said, don't lose any more. And he won the next 32. But in the process promised that TSS would do everything anybody ever dreamed of doing.
That's right. So we were involved from Yorktown in doing that. And in fact, they used my WISP version of Lisp as a benchmark for something. And
Really?
I don't remember what it was, but
Let's talk about what you then did at ASD. So you have FS. Are you running it, or are you just part of it? What was your
no,
role?
I was in charge of market. I was getting market requirements, but we were getting market requirements and with a revenue number associated with this.
So you weren't on the technical side then on doing that.
No,
That seems like a strange change from a guy who's a top architect, had the System A architecture responsibility, and now you're doing market requirements?
yep. But we were doing them. We had to do them by really understanding what was required, what the hardware was, what the cost was, and what the benefit was. It was a lot of fun because I talked to a lot of customers as to what they needed. I mean, maybe that was preparatory to what I did later at IBM, talking to customers. So, yeah, we did that, and we wound up then taking a look at FS itself and doing an analysis of it.
Now this is interesting. Let me probe that. You had done the basic architecture. They wanted to take the top level, but not those other two levels. Now this was not any more involved with Bob Evans per se, though. This was in the ASD.
No, FS was in Poughkeepsie. We were in the marketing group.
So you were no longer involved in the design of FS or the specification. You were giving the requirements and looking at the market side, and then seeing how FS, hope I'm not putting words in your mouth, but looking how FS might meet those requirements and those market needs. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, and we soon came to the conclusion that it was a disaster. So it wouldn't meet the market requirements. It would perform as low as, it's very slow. They couldn't meet. We drew up a list of about 26, I remember, in that neighborhood of things that had to be done, and it wasn't cutting the mustard. So we had a shootout at, and who ran, it's Dick, the chief architect, and I had a toe-to-toe, head-to-head fight on this, and the bad news was I won, so the FS project was killed.
And that was what, about 74, 73, 74, somewhere
Something
around
like
there,
that,
I think.
yeah.
So you were involved for quite a few years in doing this.
Yes.
Let's stay with that, because that was a major thing. IBM then announced the 370 in, I guess, about 1970 or so, as a replacement for the 360. And as I remember the story, that there was then work going to be going on the 380, which would stay with that architecture, but hopefully FS might completely replace that, and we'd go through another change in architecture. And FS gets killed. You think the work that your memory is that the work you did in the evaluation was a factor in the killing of FS?
Absolutely.
Bob Evans must not have been very happy with you.
No. At one point, he came back years later and offered me to be the architecture for 360 or 370, the chief architect. He says, "How come you're going to me?" I said, "Bob." I mean, he says, "Well, nobody else he could think of." That was not a very good in line for inducing me to take the job. So, yes, no.
Stay with, I don't want to lose that. FS was a mammoth investment for a period of time by IBM, as I recall. And it had a number of very different new concepts. Were many of those based upon the work you had done on System A?
Yes.
Or were they original with that team?
No, a lot of it was System A.
Can you describe briefly, I'm talking about your life, not just about the technology. Can you describe briefly what was so different or unusual about the architecture of System A and then carried over to FS?
Well, it was actually implemented by
Yes, by Rochester later on. Was
By
AS?
Rochester, right.
But what was so
It
special?
was a one-level store machine. It was built in a lot of high-level functions. The idea was to make it easy to write applications and so on, but they had done zero towards compatibility with the existing 360, 370 base. That was the Achilles heel of the damn thing. The thing was going to be run in emulation mode, that they would run a lot of the 370 stuff, and the performance just was anemic.
Was there any significant hardware changes required or involved in the FS project in terms of the
Yeah,
chips
well,
and
we
things?
did things. We had floating channels, if you know what that is. And
Go ahead, it's fine.
it's the ability that the machine would determine which channel to use.
Was that because of the time-sharing needs? Was that one of the reasons for doing it as against a Blaubox type of thing?
Time sharing needs.
Because remember in the 360, 370, the Blaubox was just, was an add-on. It wasn't part of the basic design
No,
concepts.
the Blaubox came about because of Yorktown, by the way.
Really?
We had to answer the TSS sort of thing, so we worked with him to help.
So you had actually done some work with that as
Yes,
well.
which led to that. So
What was it, the CP67 or something? No, the 67 was the first machine, I think,
Yes.
that had that capability, that time-sharing
Yes.
capability. Was it relative addressing or something? Like, there was some name that was used for that kind of function, where you didn't have an absolute, you were actually working, replacing things and not having to do it.
I don't remember, but yes. So
Let's keep going. So your report, who were you reporting to? Who heard your stories? Who was the one who made those judgments that, hey, we're going to kill F? That would be pretty high up in the
oh
corporation.
yeah.
How
Well,
high?
we had sold FS to John Opel.
Who was then the,
Not the CEO, but he was close. He was
he was the CEO in training.
CEO in training. He was.
John Carey was the CEO during the 70s, I believe.
That
Am I
Opel succeeded him.
Yeah, and then Akers.
But Opel had a strong role. They regarded him as the technical guy of their.
But he was an MBA.
They regarded him as the technical guy.
Did you report directly to the management committee at IBM at this point in time?
No, we were part of ASDD. Was part of data processing.
Well, you were a separate division, though, I think.
Yeah, but there was
We were
yes a
closely
separate division, but whoever was the czar of all the marketing divisions is whom we reported to.
So, but to override Bob Evans on the FS, you had to be at the top level of the. I was wondering whether it didn't go to the management committee or you didn't present.
No, we had a shootout at OK Corral between me and
I think I know who you mean, but go ahead, Dick somebody or that.
Dick, yeah, who was.
I think he had worked for Brooks. He
Yes.
he was Brooks' step. Actually, I interviewed him, so I'll remember
The
the name.
heavy
Yes.
set man.
Fine, nice man.
Nice man, yes, no.
Anyway, let's follow. So you had the shootout. Is in front of whom? Is this Opel? Who makes that decision?
I don't know, Opel or Rizzo or somebody at that level was listening to
So these were corporate level people. It wasn't so DSD, ASD are saying here's the different stories.
Yes, we don't, this thing won't cut the mustard, is what we were saying.
They had hundreds and hundreds of people, to my knowledge, working on FS. It was a mammoth project.
Yeah, oh no, in retrospect, politically, it was not it turned out that everyone put me forward, they all pushed back, and I was the spokesperson for doing this.
Now, I want to get to that, because that, to my mind, is an unusual characteristic. Here you are, basically architecture, mostly hardware, some software. You've been coming out of very technical, you're a PhD, and now they put you really to look at it from a marketing standpoint, a business standpoint. which is a little different from the role that you had up to then. Yet somehow you were able to, number one, do it, and apparently enjoyed it from what you said, but number two, you were able to articulate this stuff in a way that must have been very persuasive.
Well, I'll tell you a little side story. So out at Project Y in Menlo Park, T.J. Watson comes through, Jr., to look at what he had created. And I presented the architecture to him. And I found out later that my good friends and my management had ruined my career, my trajectory of my career, because Watson wanted to take me to Armonk as one of his AAs. So, and out of that, I got stock options, which I was like 28 years old, and they didn't give them that frequently at that. So somehow I impressed Watson. So, but the technical community, Manny Piore, you ever heard of him?
Yes, of course.
They wanted no part of this because they had sent somebody else from Endicott down as his AA, and it had not worked. You know, it's I'm not even sure they wore suits at this point.
Oh yeah, they wore suits.
And so you know, they were scared to death. The last guy they had sent there had been destroyed, and it was not a game for non-marketing people. So
it fascinates me. The ability to communicate complex technical business market information to executives is a very difficult task. Somehow you must have had the way of saying things that were net and yet convincing, so that they felt comfortable making decisions. And your background doesn't necessarily say why you would be able to do that.
No, but I think all of these things, I mean, why we were talking yesterday about relational databases. Why did Larry Ellison succeed and others didn't? And we had no one like that in expert systems, really, who could.
Which we get to later. But I'm talking about in IBM, because you know, I was there and I knew what it took to make that kind of communication at a high level. So you must have been they must have been persuasive and very net. You must have said, this is the facts, and been very persuasive of that.
No, I don't think I'm particularly net, but I got a reputation eventually that I always told the truth, which was not politically very wise, but I did, and they knew they would get the truth out of me. And the second part was let the guy think, so they knew that my first answer was the off the top of the head answer was not the one. You wait till I sleep on it and think about it. That's my characteristic in a lot of things in how I approach life. But I think that they knew I'm a very bad liar, so it's.
That may be what the important thing. They felt that you weren't trying to build your own self politically, but you were telling them what you really believed and that what your research had given you.
In retrospect, I said I went in there in front of the top management and told them what FS was a pile of crap. That you know, this is usually not a politically positive move.
No, I understand that. All right, I'm going to move ahead. You did some other things at ASD, but I'm going to move to your next assignment. When do you become the vice president in research for computer science?
So after FS died, ASD died, I went then to the corporate technical committee in between.
So that's the next job, is corporate technical. We'll be talking probably about 74 or so, somewhere in that ballpark. Okay, go ahead. So now you're reporting to the CEO.
Well, through Lou Branscombe.
So Branscombe was your direct. Okay.
Yeah.
And what were you doing there?
We would analyze technical directions of the IBM Corporation. For instance, I wound up looking at memory, and
you were 30, 40. You were 42 at that point. Yeah, you were born in 30. Six. You were less than 40 years old. You were 38 years old. Wow.
We looked at the memory and told them that was way too expensive, that they had to cut that down.
Well, you had worked on some memory stuff at ASD, hadn't you, with the 3033 and stuff?
Yes. But this was production, this was component level. And I told Carrie I was worried about the PCs. And
this is pretty early to be worried about PCs.
maybe it was the second. I had two tours on the CTC.
Yeah, my guess is this is the second tour because 74 was early.
Yeah.
Your notes here indicate that you worked on the memory product strategy
Yes.
and VSAM.
Yes.
What did you do? Did you assess it? Did you help develop it? What was your role?
Assessing it.
And you said it was good, bad, and different?
Bad.
Okay, that's why they implemented it? Or?
Didn't stop them.
Okay. What would you think would have been better at that point in time? Did you have an alternate, or is it just you didn't think that was going to work?
I don't think we had an alternate, yes. There was two contenders. One was the local guy, and the other one was work that Andy Heller had done.
Andy Heller had apparently a great deal of influence on management during this period of time.
Not here, they didn't.
No, but I remembered when I was at IBM Research a little later that he completely, he stymied the use of the relational database management work for years.
Yes, he was a believer in access methods and so on. ISAM and those sorts of things.
Anyway, let's move ahead on this a little bit more. You also note that you analyzed the workstation market.
Yes, that was later. This may be the second.
Okay, so these may be mixed up a little. Let's go ahead. You stay then as on the corporate technical committee for what, a couple of years?
Yes.
And then what do you do?
I returned to Yorktown and worked for Joel Birnbaum. He was the director of computer science, and I proposed to the corporation that we set up a systems laboratory. And the systems laboratory would investigate new concepts in designing systems. And I
So this has got to be what, about 76, 77? That's when I met you, is when I was there in 76, 77, and
sounds right.
It's about the right time period. Did you have a title then?
I was just manager of the systems lab.
Okay.
And we'd worked on that, new systems ideas. And then our friend Birnbaum took himself off to HP. And they gave me back the job of running computer science.
So that's where you're a VP of Research Division for Computer Science.
Yeah, that became a VP. Birnbaum told him, look, you're going to lose everyone unless you start giving out titles and money and things like that.
But you had gotten your first grant earlier.
Oh, yeah.
That's interesting, because you were very young and very early when
I
you
was
got
the
it.
youngest guy to get a grant, and I was the youngest man to make senior engineer at IBM.
Really? Terrific. I got a similar grant after the unbundling project that I worked on. Of course, it turned out not to be worth a nickel, because I left in the 70s. So
You didn't.
it was a total waste of time from that standpoint. Let me look at that, what you were working on. Now, my memory is that Birnbaum left around 78 because of they wouldn't move ahead with the RISC machines.
No, I think they made him a good offer. He was going to run all of HP Labs.
So you think it was that rather than because I remember one of the first things he did was work on the RISC machines out
Well,
at
that's why they hired him for.
Yes, I think that was it. And IBM wasn't doing anything with them, at least not to my memory.
Well, we did do a RISC workstation.
That was later, wasn't it? Maybe I'm wrong. That's why I'm asking you. I don't know.
I don't think so. I think he went for ambition. They made him, running HP Labs was a pretty big deal.
And his wife was an opera singer or something like that.
Yes.
It sticks in my mind. He was a good guy. He's the one I worked for that year and a half or so that I was there. So what were some of the things you did when you were in that job, the VP of Research?
Well, that's where I started the AI division.
Okay, let's move into that, because that's obviously a direct connection to what our meeting was here. What did you do, and why did you do it?
Well, so I have a long history in this technology, and I understood what expert systems were all about, and I felt IBM had to be in this technology because it was a, we can argue about whether Lisp was a great idea, but John McCarthy had also invented time-sharing systems, which had nothing to do with AI, but somehow AI seemed to be a fertile bed or incubator for new systems ideas. So I thought IBM ought to get involved in this. And
Well, what was your first exposure? I know you talked about doing something very early on, which would later be called an expert system. But what got you re-involved? What stimulated you to say, hey, this looks like an interesting area? Do you remember?
no.
There was a lot of press, of course, and there was stuff being talked about. But I don't
Now,
remember
this is
that.
before probably the press was.
See, I don't remember it being a hot topic in the
No, I
in the
just felt that
mid-70s.
AI was a good thing to do, that if we're having a computer science research division, we damn well. Well, one thing I used to do, I was a firm believer that of learning from the universities. So I arranged I would have joint meetings with MIT, Carnegie Mellon, not Stanford so much. And I would listen to what they're working on. And so some of the things being worked on in AI sounded really interesting.
Now, this is pre the 5th generation Japanese project.
Absolutely,
It's much earlier.
yes,
So you must have stayed in this job for a while.
yes.
Did you end your career in that job at IBM?
No.
I'll
No.
get back then, we'll talk. But you were there for quite a while and had a range of projects. Did you have direct connection with the IBM Japanese labs and so forth? Did you work with
I
them?
started it.
Did you? Tell
The
us about-
research lab, not
Yeah, I understand. Tell us about the research lab in Japan. How did you get started in that? Why?
I think the corporation decided they wanted one, and I was given the job of setting it up. So,
So Gomri was running the lab when I was
Yes.
there, when you were there. Fine man from my standpoint. I don't know how your relationships were, but I found him very compatible. I had known him from the math stuff, I think either back in earlier days when I first joined IBM. You seem to have had a wide range of things. So you were initiating projects, supporting projects in the research lab. Must have had a large group of people there.
yeah, we did. And it had grown quite a bit.
Couple thousand people maybe?
No. Well, eventually I got in charge of computer science activities in San Jose, as well as Yorktown, and Zurich had a computer science exhibit.
So you had a horizontal on computer science regardless of which of the IBM labs was working.
At research labs.
Research labs, yes.
And
Wow.
we were going to be involved with Vienna, but we just, I don't think we went ahead with that. So I wound up with about 2,000 scientists working for me.
Did you end up doing much of the hiring of these people? Or was it more people that were already there that you worked with?
Well, I had the interesting game of in preparing his budget, Mr. Gomery would ask all the directors for their best ideas. So you had to come in and convince him that you had some good things to do, and we did well with that, so we would add a bunch. He was doing well with the corporation getting resources, and we got at least our fair share of this. So
Let me point you in a little different direction. One of the problems that we had from IBM Research, and I think this is true in most research labs, is moving the ideas, the things that they developed into manufacturing or into the market in some form or manner. Did you ever get involved in doing that?
Sure, but I think we were in pretty good shape. I think I think we did that well, actually.
Well, let me give you two examples, and maybe they weren't yours, but one was the RISC machine, which IBM was slow in adopting, and HP and others were faster. And the other was relational database systems, which Larry Ellison put the jump on that. It took IBM till 1983 to announce a relational database management system.
Yeah, but that was a function of bureaucracy, basically. So there was a standards meeting on relational database, and Larry Ellison managed to sit in on all of them, and he figured out what that was all about, and he just went to code and did that. IBM had become, what should we say, a little
Ossified?
Ossified. I mean, I love to tell the story of DOS, MS-DOS. We had to go to Microsoft because Carey tried to get an operating system through IBM, but the procedures that had been set in place by your friend Watts Humphrey, partly because Carey thought the operating software was out of control in development, was such that it would take us a year to get to specs which we could then implement under the procedures that we had. And basically, that was too late, so they went out and found Microsoft to do the stuff.
That's an interesting story, because I'm not going to talk my story, but that was something I was involved in during that time, and that was one of the key questions, is whether we could get it inside the company, and number two, if we did inside the company, would other people use it? The fact that a third party was considered to be more market acceptable than could get other people. But I'm sure there was a lot of other parts going on.
We had trouble not only with the programming, but the hardware technology. We didn't make we didn't have the technology to build microprocessors very well. So,
did you get involved in that as part of your thing, your job at computer science?
No, I got involved in a one session at Corporate Technology Committee. I went to Carey, and I don't remember which one of them, my second stint, and I said to him, I didn't understand it. We weren't making the microprocessors, and we weren't building the operating system. What was the competitive advantage IBM had? And I guessed wrong. He said to me, I said, the Japanese will copy this and eat our lunch. So he said, go down to Boca Raton. And I went to Don Estridge and saw what they were doing, and what they had done is automate the PC line. And didn't impress me, but Carey never came back and asked me, after he sent me down there, he never asked me what I thought. And I figured there's no sense making myself completely obnoxious, since he liked me a lot. He was a good...
So you really didn't get deeply involved in the PC?
No.
Let me make the AI connection a little bit further. What did you then do, because you thought AI was an important thing? What did you do at IBM to expand it, to proselytize, whatever you want to call it, evangelize? What did you do?
Well, I left the research division and went to Harrison, which was group headquarters, and they gave me the responsibility to go into new areas for the corporation.
Mm-hmm. So, what did you were there for a while?
Yeah.
So what did you do?
What did I do? I was in charge of development, marketing, and finance of corporate-wide. And we found we were more or less of a goat, if you wish, more than anything else. We pushed applications throughout the corporation.
This is internal applications within the company. How did you push them? What did you do? Did you give them help them learn the things? Did you just get them interested? Did you show them opportunities? What
Yes.
did you do?
We didn't have money to do this. We just made it a point. They knew I was talking to the management committee, so we walked. The leverage was we would talk to the development or the marketing people and tell them we're going to make a report. And
Give me an example of one you thought was particularly successful, that you may have helped to stimulate. Let's use that word.
we did some configurators with San Jose. And
What's a configurator?
A configurator essentially, if a customer wants a certain thing, a certain problem, we would figure out what he should get.
So they worked out decision rules, whatever you want to call them, to help do that, and then would
Yes.
produce that so the salesman could use it. Was that the idea?
Yes.
Was that useful?
Yes, quite a bit. We sold computers that way. It turned out to be DEC had done this before and configured. Their machines were even more configurable than ours, so they really needed it. But it was a good.
What are some of the others? Because I gathered there were dozens of these done at that point.
Well, you should read Feigenbaum's book more. I don't remember a lot of those.
Were there any that you got personally involved in that you can remember, where you helped do the decision logic or helped to work on the?
No, I had a different job. I was evangelizing this stuff to corporate. I went all over the world talking to corporations, CEOs.
So you were talking to clients,
Yes,
not just within the company. That was my other point. It was not just what inside the company, but IBM had no product in this area per se.
Well, we had bought licenses. We were jointly marketing with IntelliCore, and I don't remember, we had some simple expert systems of our own.
But you didn't have, IBM didn't own that software, or
No.
so they would use IBM hardware to implement, to run it on, but this was not selling an IBM product.
Yeah.
Did any of the people in the software business approach you or talk to you and say, hey, why don't we do something?
Nope, not that I can remember.
So you didn't have a strong DPD connection with the sales division at that point.
We had the sales division, but they were part. Okay, I had a committee set up with Jack Keeler, Gomery, and the head of DP, vice president of DP, not the head, who was supposed to look at all this thing.
But they never came up with a marketable product.
No,
That's too bad.
maybe not.
Maybe yes, you're right in a sense. Maybe they would have made it work. You never know about those things, do you?
That's exactly right. Somebody had to go in with a customer, what they did on CICS in your realm, or these, a lot of things were done by working with the customers, looking at the problems and solving the problems. That was not done within IBM, and it was not done by any of these other guys.
Our most significant database management products and systems-like products were not done by the product divisions at that point. This we're talking 1970s through almost the 80s. They all came from DPD, supporting somebody who was doing it, whether it was, you agree or not, but it was whether a Ken Iverson with an APL or with Norm Rasmussen at the Cambridge Science Center with VMCMS. Almost all these things at that point in time were initiated through the customers. They were working with the customers. CICS was
But at that time,
Chicago.
I think we'd had, didn't we have no more bundling? I think bundling.
Bundling 69. That was on the unbundling. In June of 69, we announced separate things, and then we set up all these development groups.
It was harder to get customers to pay for a lot of those things.
It was a difficult transition, and it was very difficult. But that's what gave the life to software companies at that point. So now you had, IBM wasn't giving it away for free,
Yep.
and so they felt they could do something. It's an interesting period of time here where it's the companies, from my view, and you probably saw it better than I, still thought of itself as a hardware company.
Always thought of itself as a hardware company.
And
As a big mainframe hardware company.
even more so, exactly. Well, GSD was there, which is the System 3s and the follow-ons.
Yeah, that was set up deliberately to do that. And contrary to popular opinion, they sold more mini computers than DEC.
Yes. Well, it depends how you define a mini, but we had the series, a whole three, so we had this series 1s. There was another one, series 7, I think it was, or 7. There was a lot of stuff being sold there. People don't think of IBM as that size company.
But they did do it.
Well, the culmination in that was something that I believe took advantage of all the FS work, was the System 38 and the AS400 out in Rochester, Minnesota.
Yes.
Were you involved in that in any way?
Well, they would be looking at, they came to all our meetings and they would look at all the technology we were doing in System A.
Yes.
And I scratched my head and said, well, why the hell are you doing it? And it turned out, why are you interested? We thought we were doing a high-end system. And they said, no. All we have to do is keep up with the printer. That was the only requirement. And therefore, we could afford, and ease of use was their main goal. And what we had done with these layers had made it easier to use the system.
And easier to develop applications.
Yes.
That was a major factor for the AS400. I think when they announced it, they announced 2,000 applications on announcement day. Unbelievable.
So so they were interested. They implemented what was System A, and we just aimed at the wrong market. We thought we were we were all high-end types, basically.
It's an interesting change that took place. Okay, you're at IBM. Tell us about the culmination, your ending of your IBM career.
Well, I did this for 3-4 years. We had other products. And then my good friends at IBM management decided to offer people buyouts.
Oh.
And I had been 24 and a half years. And they made a mistake. They said you had 3 months to decide this, but if you didn't take it, they gave me years to my retirement. So they added
another 5 years?
Not 5, but they added, and they said if you don't take it, you lose this. Well, it turns out Pricewaterhouse was wrong, and they wound up. The government told them no. Once you make people eligible for they're done. So I said, oh. And then I said, what does history tell me? When these corporations start doing buyouts, they do it a second time. And sure enough, they did.
So you hung in a little bit.
Yeah, I hung in for about a year, and I had three opportunities in front of me, and I decided it was time to go and leave IBM. I had done what I could do there. And so I went, and eventually I was looking at the Cornell Supercomputer Center wanted me to run it, and I was looking at MCC, and I was looking at a startup, but I didn't like the startup game. It looked to me like you were just changing, instead of working for IBM, you were working for the VCs. So I decided that USC with this ISI was as good a thing as I could see, as I would like.
So what was this, 92 or so? You said 25 years, you joined IBM around 67. So we add 25 years to that, we take it to about 1992.
Well, 89 I left IBM.
89, okay. And you went directly to USC at that point?
Yes. Not completely, it was very funny. They let me be. I was involved up to my eyeballs in this AI, and and they had things they wanted me to do to talk to customers. So
who's they?
IBM, and IBM said they needed to borrow me for a month from USC. They would allow USC to announce me, but I would work for IBM for another month, which is what happened.
So you did you ended up cleaning up some work on the AI stuff that you had done for there. But IBM still had no product
Right.
in the AI area per se, neither hardware nor software.
As far as I know, none, yes.
Didn't at that time. All right. Now, you go back out to the West Coast now, but now to LA and not to Silicon Valley. So why did you choose USC? What appealed to you?
Okay, so somebody asked Ed what happened to Rand's computer science activities. And what had happened was that, it's a long story, I don't know if I give you the long version, was that, you remember, Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers came into being, Nixon, being the gentleman that he was, decided he would penalize Rand, and what he did was a lot of the other defense contractors didn't like the fact that Rand got, and a bunch of these other FFRDCs got contracts without having to compete. So Nixon put in a limit that you could give up to so much dollars without competing, and he just set the number for Rand just at what they already had on board. And DARPA was setting up the internet, the ARPANET at that point, and they wanted Rand to do it. But Rand had the choice of doing that or doing some of the more the studies, strategic studies. And Rand was run by economists, not technologists. So they shed themselves of that, and about 4 or 5 people left Rand Corporation and came to USC. I can put it on the floor. And so the computer work essentially transferred from Rand to ISI USC.
So what is ISI?
Information Systems Institute.
They had existed for a while before you came out there, is
Yes.
that correct? Because I heard it mentioned yesterday in our expert systems meeting.
Yes.
And what was the role of ISI?
They essentially was a DARPA contractor. They did all sorts of systems work for DARPA. So Bob Kahn used them sort of his own research lab.
Software, hardware, concepts,
Yes.
what sort of, with a whole range of things?
Yes, we produced, we did a lot of the internet. We were called the plumbers of the internet.
Give me an example.
Well, we did, you know what the domain name system,
Sure.
We invented that. And we did a lot of the software which ran the internet.
So this was a very exciting period of time.
Yeah, but I was not there at that.
No, I understand, but this, the 90s was an exciting period of time in terms of the broadening of these kinds
Yes.
of things. What do you remember of the things that you most enjoyed doing at ISI?
Well, again, I set up there.
Okay, tell us about it. That's quite pertinent.
Well, we did a whole range of activities.
You have some words here that may help. Networking, grid technologies, cybersecurity, AI, quantum computing, wow, and open source methodology. Tell us about the AI part. What did you do there?
Basically, we set up the group. We became very good at natural language. Our natural language stuff was used in Watson, for example. What else did we do that was?
Did you look at hardware implementations? Did you look at
For AI,
list
no.
machines? Any of those kinds of things?
No,
during that
to put a bookend on what was discussed yesterday, I came out there, and the AI people and some of the people who I formed this group with had list machines, and they were costing me a fortune. Aside from the cost, their maintenance bills were astronomical. And these were all covered in one budget. So I split out the budget and told the guys, you'll pay for this out of your research contracts, etc. And guess what? The list machines disappeared.
See, you've ended up in an interesting position. You started briefly in academia with your Columbia experience, and now you're back to a university, but you're not on the teaching side.
Correct.
But you still were working with professors and things like that there? You were consulting with people?
I started that. When I came there was nothing with the School of Engineering. So I started getting graduate students onto our contracts. That was, and we would get some professors. Deborah Estrin is in New York now because she wanted to do things and she couldn't do it on campus. There wasn't enough help, enough resources, and so on. So she started doing work at ISI. She spent a sabbatical year there, and she figured out that this was a good type of environment for her. So we shared her between the campus. She had a group at ISI which did.
Well, but for example, you helped develop a curriculum in informatics, didn't you?
Yes.
What was that about, and who did you work with?
I reached the conclusion at one point that basically that this research thing was very bad, that you had to get tuition dollars. Otherwise, this was important for keeping flywheels for things going. For instance, at one point, I wanted to do what's now called machine learning, and I had a guy lined up to come, but I couldn't get funding for him because I didn't have enough spare money to do that. So Google eventually did that. We also had a group on face recognition, and I couldn't find money to support that from DARPA and other things. So I needed. Getting contract money alone was not enough for my.
That's what ISI had been surviving on that kind of money before. Is that what's the case?
Well, ISI had a better deal, but it ended. That's what caused my predecessor to leave ISI. ISI had a deal where they went in and talked to DARPA, and they got a budget for the year. No contracts, just that one
budget. Wow.
It was a great deal, but they lost that just a year or two before I came, and the guy who was in charge, who had founded the place and quit. He knew he was not going to be the guy to invent new projects to sell them. He was very good at working Washington and getting a budget for ISI, but he was not I guess one of my capabilities is to think new things up and so on, and that was not his.
But you've ended up with, are you still working there at USC, or are you
No.
finished? When did you finish then?
3 years ago.
So that was about 2015 probably.
Yeah.
Let me go just a little further on what were you able to. Did you get AI introduced into the curriculum at USC, for example?
No, they had some.
They already had stuff.
They had stuff. We got more involved with teaching the courses. People would teach as adjuncts there.
You seem to be an advisor there at USC besides your ISI role.
Correct.
That you consulted and advised the Vice Dean of Engineering, people like that.
Well, I wound up getting the high performance computing center I designed and got funded, things of that sort.
You ended up being able to raise money, which was not one of your jobs. I guess inside the company you were, but you weren't outside.
That's right.
And that's a different skill, is getting people to provide money to an organization. Grant processing, I'm told, is very difficult. You have to know your way around.
Yes. That's why my latest scheme, which has nothing to do with this, but I did invent it when I was at ISI, but it wasn't going anywheres, and I had a lab to feed, so I couldn't spend the time I can now spend developing this and trying to sell it. Because
are you willing to mention what it is briefly?
Sure, I'll be happy to. I'm looking at how you do protect a power station from cybersecurity in attacks.
This is basically a software approach primarily?
Yes.
And have you actually presented it for funding to major organizations
Oh
yet?
yeah, I tried it. I went to the swamp, as some Fritz said. And he wound up in the swamp. You want to hear all this? Basically, it's.
But that to cut it off, unfortunately. But that's another whole direction. But you had good connections there in getting the money at USC.
Yeah, that's at a certain level. Now I want. This has got to be done at
A much higher level.
At a much higher level. It's got to be dedicated money.
This is not just DARPA kind of funding you needed.
No, I tried DARPA funding and didn't succeed.
Look, I'm going to we have just a few more minutes. I want to talk about you as a person and the things you've done, which obviously significant outside of your work at IBM, outside of your ISI work. So what do you do for fun?
Well, my wife and I are great art collectors, if I have to say so myself. In fact, that's one of the joys of my old age is that all sorts of artists we discovered, found, and nurtured have now become extremely popular, extremely desired, and so pieces from our collection are going to museums all over the world.
When did you start collecting?
Oh, we started when I went to IBM, basically.
So back in the 70s?
No,
60s.
In the 60s, way back.
You couldn't have had a lot of money then to buy stuff.
No. So originally I bought works from professors at Stanford and Berkeley, and they were a few $100s, that's all.
Was there a particular kind of art that appealed to you at that time?
Well,
other than being cheap enough to buy?
No. When I was 12 years old, there was an article, I believe it was Life, maybe Look, on Jackson Pollock. And they said, is he the greatest American painter? And I looked at it and I thought it was terrific. So I liked that, and that was sort of my impetus.
So abstract art at a 12-year-old you found interesting?
Yes.
Wow.
And I
Wait,
did.
Did you ever paint?
No, but I can draw maybe better than a lot of these characters could, but not good enough. I mean, my advice to young artists is go to Barcelona and look at the Miro and Picasso museums and see what they did when they were 9 years old, how they could draw and paint.
Now, I've always been excited by the fact these people, we see abstraction, but they really were good drawers. They really, really could do with that.
Yes. And paint. They really knew how to paint.
Colors and things. So, okay, so you're now in the West Coast in the 60s. Are you looking for abstract type of things? Is that the nature?
In 1968, the Museum of Modern Art had a show of Miro prints. It was the first time he had done large, with a process called aquatints, which was new, and they were like having a painting almost. And we started buying them, and we had a...
I'm sorry, was it aquatint?
Aquatint. And we bought Picasso prints, and then we went to Rauschenberg and Johns, and then someone pointed out when I'm paying already for a Picasso print, I could buy a small de Kooning painting, and we did. So.
Boy, you have all the right names, don't you?
Well, yes, but not those days were easy. Then we went into young art, brand new art, because the de Kooning you could only buy so much for a lot of money. So you could buy a big painting for a young artist.
Was this a particular location you then focused on, or were you looking internationally?
No, New York, but we were basically based in New York.
So you were looking at young painters, young artists in that area?
Yes. It was hard. Europe, buying European art, well, it was hard to see. We had to see.
Did you have a particular gallery that you worked with or people there in New York?
No, not particularly.
Because sometimes you use them as a bird dog to find interesting people.
No, we were the first collectors of Basquiat. You probably never heard of him.
I've heard of him.
And we were the first collectors of Keith Haring. So we had worked our way.
How did you find these people? We just have a minute or two, but how did you find these people? Did they find you?
No, we eventually, we didn't find these guys until '80. We had been collecting since '68, and we figured out, we bought some young artists in the '70s, and they didn't make it for us. We gave them away. So we eventually started seeing young artists, going to the galleries which showed young artists.
That was why I was wondering whether you had a particular gallery or a couple of them which
No, it
specializes.
varied by artists. I mean, you couldn't. There are some people who just buy from one gallery, and that's their collection.
Okay, so you have currently a very large collection, I gather, and you're putting these pieces in museums around the world at times. Are they exhibiting your stuff?
Well, at Princeton, we have 100 pieces.
Are those donated or are those on loan?
Yes, half and half. We've given them half and half we still.
Other places that you've either given or you have on
Yeah,
loan?
when we left California, we gave about 60, 70 pieces to local museums, Santa Barbara, Riverside, Mocha a few, and the Hammer a few.
You've been very generous donators then.
Yes, we're the largest donators to Princeton in terms of numbers. I'm not sure in terms of value because Forbes is one of the alum and he's got a big
Some big ones, yeah.
a big expensive collection.
You still have a major number of pieces that you still own.
Yes.
Where do you store them?
We store, 50 are at Princeton on loan.
I mean the ones that you haven't out on loan. You have your own gallery, your own place that you exhibit?
Well, we have a couple of houses. My sons have stuff. We have storage.
Where is your home right now? Where do you live most of your time?
Manhattan.
And the other part of your time, are you out here on the coast? Or?
No, in Westchester.
So Manhattan and Westchester are your two primary locations.
Yes.
Look, this has been fascinating. As I met you many years ago for a relatively brief time where we were both at IBM Research.
Yes.
And I knew nothing about your collections and so forth, but you were working for the same guy that I was working for at the time. And you continued on, and I left and went to do consulting for software companies. So now we've reconnected some 40 years later in this thing.